What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope everybody's having a wonderful start of your weekend. If you're going out, don't drink and drive. You know the drill. This morning, I'm making it a tradition now with my friends at the night shift. Clint Weldon, Sander Jones, UAP therapist Eric Schlimmer, who has a wonderful case that he's looking into that I will share with you at a separate episode. It's about a mass sighting that happened throughout the 1977 in California, which is a really wonderful year for UAP events. Expect that video, and hopefully I can have Eric on the show soon. I'm talking to him about it now, and also, of course, my good friend Dan Cleary from the Others from Another Mother podcast. We're kind of forming like a band, a boy band. Sander had a wonderful analogy for the night shift Fridays, which we jokingly call Doomer Fridays because of everything that's going on in the world and how doomy it can get sometimes. I get it. It's not that I like Doom, I really don't, but talking about it with those guys, it's kind of fun. But honestly, obviously, my hopes are for the betterment of humanity. That's why we're talking about today's topic, because during that conversation, there was a challenge against one of ufology's most respected people. I'm talking about Mr. George Knapp, investigative journalist who brought Bob Lazar to the fold. Because of him, we know Area 51. He's been working with Jeremy Corbell for a number of years now, and they have a show called Weaponized. They brought forward people like Mr. Matthew Brown. They were responsible partly for David Grush being part of the hearings in 2023. And they were the first ones who spoke to David Grush. As far as I'm concerned, he reached out to them at a Star Trek convention. I think it was in Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. So they have been at the very center of the reporting of whatever has been happening over the last, well, for George, it's plus 40 plus years. For Jeremy, it's like 20 years or something like that. He's been involved in all of this. So there's a story that is kind of similar in many cases, only more broadly detailed to the Bob Lazar story, and it is the Dan Burrish story. And Clint Weldon, some of his most watched videos are about Dan Burrish. And Clint had Mr. Brian Jackson on the show once to talk about the Burrish case. If you guys don't know who Brian Jackson is, he's a researcher who has been investigating the Dan Burrish case for a while. He has a website called Burrish Archive, where he archives absolutely everything on the Dan Burrish case. The interesting part about the Dan Burrish case is the wild claims that he makes over a number of interviews that he's done throughout the years. He first came out in 2002. He talks about being a PhD in biology and working at Area 51 and S4, and specifically working with biological entities, an entity he called J-Rod. And this J-Rod entity allegedly spoke to him telepathically, talked to him about many different aspects of the different species of aliens there are, and about future humans, about actual aliens. So it gets really woo, really, really woo, really fast. And I know that people, for example, like me, when they hear so many things happening, they even include some elements of time travel in there. And there's just a lot. So if you're somebody who casually is looking into UFOs and you stumble upon a story like this, perhaps the immediate reaction is not going to be to fully believe everything that you hear, because it's really out there. And the thing is, during this conversation, there is a piece of audio that Clint Weldon talked about in his previous stream, where George Knapp at Contact in the Desert is asked about the Dan Burrish case, because he famously wrote what Clint Weldon considers a hit piece against Dan Burrish back in the early 2000s. And he couldn't find it for a while, and he found it. I'm going to leave a link in the description. The thing is that Clint Weldon talked about this audio from Contact in the Desert where George Knapp doubles down on that hit piece. And I'm just going to play you what George Knapp said during this exchange at Contact in the Desert, where Dan Cleary was also present there, and he saw the whole exchange. So here it is.
Hi, Jerome. I want to just tell you how incredible I think that you've been, and I got into this because of your interview with Bob Lazar. That was many years ago. But I do have a question for you. There's been tremendous amount of data and evidence substantiating Dan Burish's case, that he worked at S4 and that he worked with an ET named J-Rod. And what I wanted to ask you is that much of this evidence is now coming back into light, so much so that his case was entered into public record in the last congressional hearing in November in Washington, D.C. by Michael Schellenberger. His name, Dan Burish, was said 9 times in these reports. And I wanted to ask you about a 2004 article that you wrote about him in UFO magazine.
Okay, what do you want to ask?
I wanted to ask, it seemed as if you questioned his case, you questioned his experience with the J-Rod. And I wanted to ask you if you had any more evidence or anything else that you wanted to share that might turn a light back onto Dan Burish's case.
I hope the light does get shined on him because he's completely full of crap. No disrespect to you, but I mean, I think this was an effort by Dan and a merry group of pranksters that spent many months trying to convince me that he was the real deal. And every turn that I investigated, I found it to be a bunch of baloney. His first name, when I knew him, was Dan Crain, and he pretended to be a scientist. He is not. He does not have degrees where he said he got them. And I know that that's a familiar kind of a thing for when we're talking about UFOs and Las Vegas, but I spent a lot of months looking into he and his group. And they just made stuff up. They put on costumes. I know when the movie came out, what the heck was it? It was the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code came out. Suddenly Dan Crain, who by then claimed that Dan Burrish, that was his new name, by then he had claimed he had saved the world twice. He had gone to Iraq and saved the world by preventing the release of biological weapons that would have killed everybody. So he's a bit of a martyr. And then when the Da Vinci Code came out, he claimed he was part of Opus Dei. He and his group were Opus Dei. They would send me photos of Dan being driven around by his future wife. She's like driving a limo, and he's in the back in a military uniform. He's never in the military. And she gets out and lets him out in this gravel pit that's by my house, by the way. Like, this is some secret operation out here in this gravel pit. I just found it ridiculous. And they really ran a number at me that went over a number of months. They would have different letters that were sent to me by different people. Boy, I think this guy living next to me is really deep into UFOs. I saw military people come to his house and take him out in the middle of the night. It was a very elaborate attempted hoax, I think. And if there is substantial evidence that he's the real deal, I haven't seen it. So the fact that Schellenberger submitted a letter.
I don't know where we got the information. I was there. Nobody put on the record anything about him. So that's weird information.
Yeah, no offense, but I get boxes of stuff about Dan Crain Burish. If he's for real, great. But I'm done with it.
And this is what we're up against.
It sounds to me like somebody tried to play a number on Knapp, according to what he says. The interesting part here is what Clint Weldon said, because, and I wanted to check out the interview he did with Brian Jackson for this reason, because there's a bunch of slides that Brian Jackson presented that I wanted to corroborate. Let's go through the claims of Dan Burrish first, right? So he claims that he was assigned to something he calls Project Aquarius, involvement a containment sphere with a living extraterrestrial biological entity referred to as J-Rod species on underground levels 4 and 5 at S4. This J-Rod was one of 3 entities from the 1953 Kingman, Arizona crash. 1 perished on impact, 1 was sent to Los Alamos, and 1 was sent to Area 51 S4. That's the first claim. There's another one. He claims to have worked at some of the most prestigious and secret institutional and United States government laboratories. He claims to have worked at Papoose Lake, Site City, at Dulce, at Los Alamos, Brookhaven National Laboratory, and Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. and he claims to have worked at Area 51 S4 between 1994 and 2006. The Aquarius program was operated under the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory and the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. That's what he claims. This DIA connection will come into play a little later that I'm going to show you. He also claims to have worked alongside several constituents belonging to MJ12. So it gets really crazy. In 2005, Dan Burrish, or Dan Crain, claims that he was given authorization from members of MJ12 to release his story and, quote unquote, tell the world. Claims that he has had a long-standing relationship with former NSA Director John Mike McConnell. McConnell was also Vice Admiral in the U.S. Navy and U.S. Director of National Intelligence, DNI. So this is riddled with intelligence community apparatus. And I find it really interesting that people from, for example, the DIA are the most involved currently in the disclosure effort. And Brian Jackson also showed a bunch of recommendation letters that he has on his website. The point of contention that Clint Weldon used was that he gave a lecture at Caltech back in 2008 on March 10th. It is called A Peculiar Silicate Associated Phenomenon, Dan Burish and Marcia McDowell. This is a point of contention for Clint, where he claims that if he wasn't really a scientist, what is he doing giving lectures at Caltech? Which is a decent point. There are some problems, though, because Mr. Brian Jackson did make contact with somebody from that is very famous. He's been criticized over the years so much about many things he's been involved with in terms of the UFO topic. And that is a red flag, in my opinion. The main interview that Dan Burrish did was with a man named Bill Hamilton. It's the most famous interview he did, and I'm going to link it in the description so you guys can check it out. Hamilton, after the interview that he did, and where they talked about everything, how the alien communicates telepathically with them, about the biology of this alien, he said this, and this is also within the presentation of Brian Jackson. I'm going to leave links in the description for everything, and I'm going to show you a few more things from Brian from his Twitter account. But I'm going to show you this. Hamilton said, after all that I've heard and after piecing together over 20 different amazing testimonies, I think I finally understand the reason for the cover-up. It is a story that spans eons of time and devolves into who we are and who they are. We are all related, and DNA is the gem of the cosmos. There is so much that now makes sense once I had threaded it all together, that I am amazed and at the feel of it, the truth of it, and the miracle of space, time, and life. The one thing I have heard time and again is that time is short, that time is running out, that big changes are ahead, and that the world may never be the same again. Only when I check this further will I report on it. This is not just another UFO story. The cosmic code is there for all to use, their intelligence to decipher. And this is where I think it gets the most interesting, because essentially this Dan Burish story is talking about the potential of time travel being involved, but humans from the future coming back to potentially change whatever outcome comes from the singularity, where we seem to be going towards a point of convergence. Don't you feel? It's happening with AI. It's happening with the war. It's happening with the UFO topic. It's happening with everything. And we do seem to be moving all the way towards a point of convergence. This is at the heart of the Dan Burrish story. They talk about this project Aquarius and some things that Mr. Jackson also includes in his Twitter account that I am going to show you to. First, let's go to this timeline, the doctrine of the convergent timeline paradox. Evolutionary past, soon, which means a potential catastrophe. Today is right now. And then it kind of sounds like a loop. And the reason that I find this really interesting is because return back to mankind, says down here, to alter their genetics to cure their future peripheral neuropathy, to help alter mankind's evolution toward a different timeline and bypass the catastrophe. Do you guys remember when I've been talking to Dr. Piotti when he says that every 26,000 years or so, some entity comes to Earth and tampers with the DNA of the dominating hominid at the time? He found this through looking at remains of our ancestors. And this is what he claims. And it's very similar to this. It's very similar to the extraterrestrial model from Dr. Michael Masters. And there seems to be stuff happening right now that points towards that. Those underground facilities are being reported on, and some elements of a potential breakaway civilization being formed or already existing. This goes deep into an alleged plan that was made long, long ago to potentially help humanity or move it towards certain roads so it doesn't completely disappear. And I don't know if that's true, but it's really heavy stuff. Another part that I want to share with you guys is this project Aquarius. Let's go through each of them. Shout out to Brian Jackson for making this. I'm going to leave links to everything in the description. This is the project that Dan Burish claims to be a part of. It says Project Aquarius, the overall umbrella designation for the study of extraterrestrial biological entities, EBEs, and their interaction with humans on Earth. Dr. Dan Burish, a microbiologist, was a working group leader for Project Aquarius at the Papoose Lake facility at S4, allegedly. One of these projects is Project Sigma that deals with the mission was to establish communications with aliens. Project Galileo deals with the propulsion system of extraterrestrial and the future terrestrial vehicles. This implies that we have both. We know that Dr. Masters talks about the possibility that these objects are time machines. Project Psychic, this project focused on the potential of beam weapons derived from alien craft and aimed to prototype them, using gravity and lensing to collimate a destructive beam. Project Looking Glass, this is perhaps one of the most interesting ones because Matthew Brown did mention in his tweet that the US has a capability to affect future events that is based on AI. I wonder if there's a connection here. Project Looking Glass deals with the time distortion, specifically exploring the physics of observing the effects of an artificially produced gravity wave on time and showing future probabilities. Then there's an unnamed second generation weapons program. It was a separate weapons program that evolved from Project Sidekick. And then it's Dr. Dan Burish's program, Biological Defense Operations Suite. This involved a suite of biological defense operations where Dan Burish served as a senior scientist. Then there's Project Lotus, also known as Starflower. Initially an accessory project, it became very significant, and it involves studying what they call Ganesh particles that can repair damaged cells, possess characteristics of living intelligence, and are linked to the origins of life. And if you guys have been hearing me talk about Bob Grenier, I don't know if this might be tied to that, but they understand it as Ganesh particles. And maybe Bob Grenier understands it as something else, as the toroidal movements. But that would be interesting to dive deep into that rabbit hole, because I do think that what Mr. Grenier is investigating does have some truth to it. I don't know how else to explain it, but you guys got to go to his website that I'm going to leave in the description, his YouTube channel. Then there's Project Preserve Destiny. This project, established before 1960, is aimed to prepare segments of the human population for anticipated cataclysms around the 2012 timeframe, which has already passed 13 years ago. But this is interesting because we've seen people like Lou Elizondo, like Matt Ford, like Ross Coulthard, and others talking about some kind of an event that is going to happen between 2026 and 2027. And we see Chris Bledsoe talking about speaking to the lady and talking about premonition and potential bad things and good things that are happening. And I just see a pattern here. I don't know if you guys notice it. I just wanted to point that out. Then there's Project Preserve Mother. This project involved deploying Ganesh particles to clean up polluted ecosystems, such as in Cabrillo Bay. And then there's Project Rain Dancer. This compartmentalized chemtrail project aimed at for aerosolized inoculation and tested Ganesh particles as a piggyback project. Shout out to Brian Jackson for making these. I don't know if any of this is true. This is what the Dan Burrish case is mostly about, this type of information. And obviously, hearing George Knapp completely dismissing it calls for at least a conversation between both parties and see if they can maybe talk it over. Because to me, it seemed like, for example, Clint Weldon is not completely agreeing with what George Knapp is saying because of all the data that he's seen. And I wonder if Mr. Knapp has seen the data. And I guess it would be really cool if George would go on Clint's show and talk about it, just like openly. Clint did say that he was okay with any evidence that he saw that convinced him otherwise. He's not like married to the idea, but there is a lot of different data points that Brian Jackson has presented, Dan Burrish has said in his interviews, and a lot of corroborating data from outside. For example, the Dr. Piotti stuff that I told you about and Mike Masters stuff that I told you about. So it is a whole, like a major story that seems to be interconnecting on all sides. And everybody in ufology that is talking about the phenomenon in general, whether it's they think it's spiritual or nuts and bolts or whatever, seems to be intertwined. Don't you guys think? It's really strange. And I know that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of lies embedded in truth, and it can get really difficult at times. I get it. I've tried to check out a number of times already because it's just too much. But I do think that enabling conversations like this in a respectful manner and just debate over a topic like this is good for the community if you do it like honestly and respectfully. So I would say that Mr. Knapp maybe could entertain the idea of going with Clint and talking about this, or maybe with Ryan Jackson. We heard that he doesn't want to deal with Mr. Burrish anymore, and that's completely understandable. But Clint is a different story, and maybe it would be a really cool conversation between you two. I would bet that it would be because Clint is wonderful. So yeah. But let me know what you think in the comments about all that I showed you about this disagreement between Clint Weldon and George Knapp and over the Dan Burrish story. Do you think Dan Burrish is telling the truth, or do you think George Knapp is correct? Let me know. If you like the content you see, I'm going to ask you to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. It only costs you a few seconds, and it is what helps us the most, so thank you. But if you want to support us in any other way, there's a bunch of links down there. You can become a member, or you can support us on KGRA. Anything you choose to do is always appreciated, so thank you. That's it for me today on this video, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, stay curious and inquisitive, like Clint, always. Bye.